Before the Witch King became a symbol of dread, cloaked in black, crowned with malice, and feared across Middle-earth, he was something far more tragic. A man. Not a phantom, not a wraith, but a living soul, flesh and bone, who once walked beneath the stars of Numenor. His name has long since been lost to the winds of time, forgotten by history, erased from scroll and song. But once, long ago, he had a name. He had a voice, a lineage, a heartbeat. He may have stood proudly upon the decks of a Numenorian ship, gazing out across the sea with dreams that did not yet reek of corruption. Did he once ride with honor? Did he speak of justice, of legacy, of glory won in battle? Perhaps. Or perhaps the seeds of darkness were always there, waiting to bloom. That is the ache of it, we do not know. Tolkien, ever the master of untold stories, left us only fragments, like broken shards of a mirror reflecting a man whose face we can no longer see. What twist of fate, what whispered promise or buried ambition lured him to take the ring? Did he reach for power, or was he running from death? In the silence left by forgotten history, we are left only to wonder. And in that wondering, a shadow takes shape. Not the villain we know, but the man who once was. And that, perhaps, is more haunting than his scream on the battlefield. The knowledge that the Witch King was not born monster. He became one, slowly, willingly, tragically. He is the ghost of a fallen age, the echo of a man whose name was once spoken with pride, and now, not at all. It began not with swords drawn or banners raised, but with whispers, soft, persuasive, almost beautiful. Sauron did not storm the gates of a region as a conqueror. He entered it as a friend, clad in fair form and bearing the name Anatar, the Lord of Gifts. He brought with him secrets older than stone and promises wrapped in silver words. The elves, ever drawn to beauty, to knowledge, to craft, welcomed him. They did not see the shadow behind his smile. In the forges of a region, beneath the golden leaves of holly trees, he worked beside Celebrimbor and the Gwaitham Myrddin, sharing lore, offering insights. He spoke of preservation, of timelessness, of mastering the substance of Middle-earth itself. And they listened. Oh, how they listened! For in their hearts, even the wise harbored a yearning to preserve what they loved, to defy the march of time. And Sauron, ever cunning, fed that yearning with a fire they could not see was tainted. The rings of power were born in this golden age, hammered into being by hands that believed they were shaping beauty. But beauty, guided by pride and blinded by trust, became the gateway to dominion. When Sauron slipped away and forged the One Ring in the shadows of Mount Doom, the true purpose of his counsel was revealed. He had not come to guide, but to ensnare. The forges of a region, once a place of wonder, had become the womb of enslavement. In their desire to preserve, the elves had almost doomed themselves. And thus began a tale not of war alone, but of betrayal dressed in gold, of trust turned to poison. A caution whispered on the wind. Not all gifts are freely given. Not all teachers seek your growth. Some only seek your soul. 9 rings, 9 promises wrapped in gold. To men, Sauron gave the greatest share, not by accident but by design. For among all the races of Middle-earth, it was men who proved the most willing to reach beyond their bounds. Elves sought to preserve, dwarves to hoard, but men dreamed of rising above death itself. They feared the ending more than they feared the cost. And so, when the rings were offered, there was no resistance, only outstretched hands. Kings, warlords, sorcerers, they were mighty in their day, and the rings made them greater still. Their enemies fled before them. Their kingdoms grew vast. Their names were carved into stone. But with each triumph, the ring tightened its grip. Slowly, the world around them dimmed. Slowly, the line between the seen and the unseen blurred. They lived on, yes, but it was a twisted life, stretched like a shadow cast by a flickering flame. Time no longer passed for them in days or seasons, but in whispers and regrets. One by one, their flesh faded, and their wills became smoke. And in the end, They were not kings or men at all, but wraiths. Slaves to a ring they once thought a crown. The nine became Sauron's greatest weapons, not because they were the strongest, but because they had once believed they were free. Their fall was not a moment, but a slow surrender, a drawn-out erosion of soul. And perhaps that is the most haunting truth of all. They were not forced into darkness. They chose it, little by little, step by step. And so the nine walked still, empty and eternal, bound to a promise that was never meant to be kept. A gift turned curse, a fate accepted with open arms. In the age before the fall, the Númenóreans were the pride of mortal kind, tall as ancient oaks, wise beyond measure, and fierce as storm-tossed seas. They were seafarers, conquerors, kings of stone and salt. But beneath their shining legacy, pride stirred like a slumbering serpent. They'd been gifted long life, great knowledge and lands vast and green, but it was not enough. They looked eastward across the seas, not with wonder, but with hunger. Middle-earth became less a realm of kindred races and more a prize to be claimed. And from their tall ships stepped not emissaries, but lords cloaked in iron and conquest. Among them, perhaps, was one who would become more feared than all the rest, a highborn lord of noble descent, whose heart had already begun to darken. In the heat of battle and the cold of ambition, something shifted in him. The glories of Númenor no longer satisfied. He wanted more, and Sauron, patient and watching, saw this. He saw the rising tide of pride and desire among the great houses of Westeros, and he offered them what they craved: dominion, power, and above all, deliverance from death. To the world, they remained noble. To their people, they were saviors. But in secret, they accepted rings that whispered promises older than the stars and more poisonous than any blade. The lords of Númenor, once beacons of honor, became vessels of shadow. And from these once great conquerors rose the Nazgûl, the Ringwraiths. The Witch-king, chief among them, did not fall in a single moment. He drifted, step by step, from pride to ruin, until the man he once was vanished beneath the crown of dread. The tragedy of Númenor was not only its drowning, it was the fading of its greatest sons into myths of terror. Long before he became the Witch-king, long before his voice was a scream on the wind or his form a shadow beneath a crown, he was a man, a lord of Númenor, perhaps, born in a time when the island still gleamed with the light of forgotten blessings. He may have walked marble halls, his cloak catching the ocean breeze as he looked westward toward forbidden shores, wondering what lay beyond the horizon of mortal life. His sword was likely forged in honor, his victories sung in the courts of kings. And yet, within him stirred a question no song could quiet. Why must men die? That question, ancient and echoing through the halls of Númenor's proudest houses, became his burden. When the fleets of Númenor sailed east, he was likely among them, no longer a youth of wonder, but a warrior of conquest. He stood upon the shores of Middle-earth not as a guest, but as a ruler. And there, in those foreign lands, something in him shifted. Perhaps he first tasted sorcery in the smoke of sacrifice, or heard Sauron's whispers in dreams. By the time the ring was offered, it was not a corruption, it was a culmination. He did not flinch when the gold touched his skin. He welcomed it. He had long ago chosen the path of power, of domination, of eternal legacy. And so, the man who may once have stood beside heroes slowly vanished. What remained was ambition forged into silence, and silence into shadow. The tragedy is not just what he became, but that no one remembers who he was. Not even he. He traded legacy for eternity and gained only a name spoken in fear. And yet, somewhere within the cold shell of the Witch-king, a heartbeat may once have echoed with nobler purpose. The ring did not consume him all at once. No flame, no fall. No final moment marked his undoing. Instead, it was a slow unraveling, quiet, merciless, and unseen. Day by day, the man he had once been thinned, stretched across the long years like mist over still water. His senses dulled, but his awareness sharpened in cruel ways. He began to see things others could not, phantoms beyond the veil, voices beneath silence. Reality, once solid, began to tremble beneath his feet. The warmth of the sun grew distant, the taste of wine turned to ash, and the laughter of men became noise without meaning. His body still walked among them, tall and proud, but his soul had already begun to drift. The ring fed on him, on his fears, his desires, his memories, until he could no longer tell where he ended and the darkness began. And worst of all, he knew it. He could feel the light slipping through his fingers, the past erasing itself moment by moment. He clung to power because it was all he had left. He wore his authority like armor, his silence like a mask, but inside, he was vanishing. Not into death, but into something worse, invisibility. His voice still commanded, his enemies still trembled, but he was no longer living. He was lingering. The fading, as the wise would later call it, was no gift of immortality. It was a curse without end, a cruel parody of eternal life. And when he finally passed in a shadow, when the world could no longer see him, he was already long gone. The man had died ages before the body, and so the Witch King came to be, not born in fire, but in silence. Not slain, but forgotten. When at last he faded fully from the world of flesh, he did not vanish into obscurity. No, he rose again, this time not as a man, but as a shadow crowned. In the frozen north, where few dared tread and fewer still returned, he built a kingdom not from stone or law, but from fear. Angmar, a name that would come to shiver on the tongues of kings. There, in that desolate realm of ice and ruin, the Witch King ruled not with armies alone, but with arcane force. He was no mere warlord. He was a sorcerer steeped in dark arts older than any written tongue. His fortress, Carndum, pulsed with spells wrought from cold fire and whispered agony. Winds howled his name across the mountains, not as sound, but as presence. His will twisted the land. Crops failed where his gaze lingered. Beasts fled before his shadow. And in secret chambers, he wove enchantments to break minds and rot the roots of kingdoms. Yet his power was not born in Angmar. It was sharpened there. Long before, in the days of Númenórean conquest, he had dabbled in dark knowledge. But now, with the ring pulsing at his very soul, magic obeyed him like a hound on a leash. The name Witch King was not a flourish. It was a title earned in the crucible of dread. He was a master of illusions, of curses, of bending the unseen to his will. And under his rule, Angmar became more than a kingdom. It became a graveyard for hope. The north groaned under his dominion, and from the wreckage of fallen realms, the legend of the Witch King only grew. Not just a servant of Sauron, but a dark king in his own right. A sovereign of sorrow, crowned in shadow. Though their names were lost, and their voices silenced by centuries, echoes of Númenor still clung to the Nazgûl like sea salt in a dying breeze. Among the nine were three who had once sailed beneath proud banners, lords of the West, born to the great island kingdom that had challenged the very will of the Vala. They were mariners, conquerors, seekers of dominion and immortality, ambitions that had not withered in death, but festered into something far colder. And even as wraiths, something of their seafaring souls endured. When the Ringwraiths cornered Frodo at the ford of Brunnen, only 3 dared step into the water. 3 who did not flinch before the rushing river. 3 who pressed forward into the current as though it were their birthright. Could it be, then, that these were the Númenórean lords? Men who once carved harbors in strange coasts and crossed oceans not with fear, but with fire in their hearts? Even now, beneath their cloaks and crowns of malice, a fragment of that pride remained, distorted but not erased. They had not simply become shadows. They had become corrupted reflections of their former glory. The Witch King, foremost among them, bore that ancient weight more than the rest. His every command, every chilling whisper, seemed to resonate with the authority of a lost empire. His spirit still carried the rhythm of tides, the memory of ship keels cutting across glassy seas, now twisted into a hunger for conquest without end. The legacy of Numenor did not end with its drowning. It endured in specters who had outlived even memory, who turned ancient greatness into a ghost. And so, in every scream of the Nazgûl, there lingers a song once sung in white stone halls, forgotten by the world, but remembered by death. In the end, it was not greed, nor hatred, nor even ambition that undid the Nine. It was fear, quiet, ever-present, and inescapable, the fear of death. From the moment of their awakening, men bore a burden no other race shared, the gift of Iluvatar, mortality. Yet what the Vala named a gift, men learned to see as a curse. They watched the elves linger unchanging beneath the stars, while their own days slipped by like leaves on a river. Even the mighty of Numenor, who lived for centuries, felt the slow tightening of time, and from that fear bloomed desperation, a hunger to outrun the end, to trap life in amber, to become more than mortal. Sauron knew this. He saw the trembling in their hearts and held out his hand, and it gleamed a ring, not just a symbol of power, but a promise. You do not have to die. And so they took it, willingly, eagerly. But immortality was not within the gift of Sauron to grant. What he gave was not life, but undeath, a cruel elongation of being that preserved the body but eroded the soul. The longer they lingered, the less they remained themselves. They were not living. They were delaying the inevitable. And in doing so, they lost everything that made them men. The Witch-king, once mighty and proud, became a hollow echo of that fear, a being who had escaped death only to become its servant. And in him we see the cautionary tale, that in fleeing the end, they found something far worse. For the shadow that they feared did not destroy them. It consumed them slowly from within. And thus, the greatest curse of men was not that they must die, but that they would do anything not to. The Witch-king is not merely a villain of the present. He is a relic of a world that no longer exists. He walks through the Third Age like a monument to all that was lost, a fragment of an empire drowned, a shadow cast by glories turned to ruin. When he raises his blade, it is not just steel that cuts, but memory of Númenórean ships darkening the horizon, of palaces carved from white stone, of men who once believed themselves gods. Angmar was his throne, yes, but it was only ever a mausoleum, built upon the bones of forgotten greatness. He is not alive, but lingering, a wraith not just of body, but of history itself. In him are the whispers of the West's pride, its fall, its grasping for eternity. And in him we see how far that legacy has decayed. The man he was, his name, his voice, his hopes, all have crumbled beneath centuries of silence. Yet he endures, because evil remembers what the world forgets. And so, he strides forth, a ghost dressed in power, a king with no kingdom but terror. His every command echoes like a bell tolling for ages long dead. To face him is to face not just a foe, but the weight of the past itself, sharpened and cruel. The Witch-king is not simply a servant of Sauron. He is the embodiment of a broken age, the final scream of Númenor's defiance, now twisted into wrath. Where he walks, memory follows, distorted, painful, and unresolved. He is not just a terror of the now. He is what remains when pride, fear, and magic are left to rot for 1,000 years. And until the last echo fades, he will not rest. For history has teeth, and he is one of them. The tale of the Witch-king is not merely the story of a villain. It is the haunting chronicle of pride, fear, and the long shadow of forgotten glory. From noble beginnings in the sunlit courts of Númenor to the sorcerous darkness of Angmar, his journey reflects the slow decay of those who reach beyond their mortal bounds. Each step he took, each ring he wore, each spell he cast, echoed with the ruin of an age long past. In him, we see not just a wraith, but a memory, twisted, enduring, and utterly tragic. He is not just a shadow. He is what shadows remember.